Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear friends, I'd like to focus on Venezuela. And the title of my today's presentation is Can Putin Save Maduro? The reason that this is such a hot topic, as you all know, is that there is talk in Washington about the imminent attack on Venezuela, supposedly to remove the narco trafficking regime of Maduro. And of course, nobody seriously believes that this is a narco trafficking regime. This is simply a US or old fashioned American imperialism or Monroe Doctrine or desire to control the Western Hemisphere, very much in tune with Trump's overall strategy that he has, announced at the beginning of his presidency. So my topic today really is to focus on the Russian factor and to what extent Russian card, as it is sometimes called, can be played in the unfolding of the coming events. So, as we all know, the United States sent several warships, aircraft carrier, landing ship, and a huge armada to the coast of Venezuela. And the preparations are on for a possible invasion. So these are the facts, and what I will do today is to discuss what are the exactly known facts, what are half-known facts, and finally the speculation or the interpretation or the possible scenarios of what can happen. Now, it is also a fact that President Maduro asked China, Russia, and Iran for help. And it is also a fact that Venezuela has a military relationship with all three. The most important of those is Russia, which I will discuss in a minute, but also with China and with Iran. Now, what is not known is what exactly was delivered and what was not delivered, and that would affect significantly the capacity of Venezuela or Maduro's regime to resist. But of course, the resistance depends on what to resist, and that depends in its turn from the American war plans. Now, again, this is a matter of speculation. Nobody knows what the Americans will do. But here are some simple facts. Again, Venezuela is a pretty big country. It's more than double the size of Ukraine. It has very rough terrain. It has mountains and jungles. And they're much bigger than Vietnam, where the United States, with 500,000 troops, were stuck for years and years, not even being able to occupy the whole country. So, a war in Venezuela could be a very difficult enterprise. And of course, it would require much more than, an armada of ships. So from the kind of size of American forces concentrated in the Caribbean, one can speak about a much more limited operation, which probably would be like the one in Iran. And that is to decapitate the leadership, to kill Maduro, possibly to seize the capital and the airfields and the ports and the strategic centers, and then install a puppet regime, which Americans have done many times in the 1950s and 60s in Latin America. So some things are different now than then, and that is what we're going to discuss, and that's the Russian and the Iranian help or involvement. Now, if the Americans do strike, it depends, again, what their objectives are. And it also depends a lot on the internal coherence of the Maduro regime. and its capacity to resist, especially if the capital is seized. And in that case, it would be very, very important to what extent the regime does enjoy popular support or doesn't, and it could render resistance. And it is on the last part, the capacity of Maduro regime to render resistance, that I'd like to focus now, because that depends directly on the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian help. Now, let me focus first on the Russian factor. And the most important element in the Russian factor is the treaty of multifaceted economic and military cooperation. Now, the treaty was just ratified at the end of October. It was signed in May 2025, and it was signed into law uh, on 12th of November 2025. So now it is a full-fledged treaty. It is not a treaty obligatory alliance as it is, for example, the mutual defense treaty with North Korea, between North Korea and Russia. No, it is a treaty of a kind of a cooperation and partnership. And a big part of it is indeed oil cooperation, circumventing sanctions cooperation, financial instruments of all kinds to live and survive in the conditions of Western sanctions. And also, we do know that there are some clauses that are not made public concerning the military cooperation. Um, Now, what we do know about public knowledge, what has officially Russia delivered, and that is 50,000 of Igla missile air defense. These are light air defense missiles that could be quite deadly in low-flying aircraft and helicopters. Also, there is quite dated Soviet era Bug air defense system, which is still quite effective, and the S-400, S-300, and that indeed is a powerful anti-missile defense, especially in the conditions of assault by aircraft against the targets in Venezuela. Also, the Russians have supplied over the years 30 Su-30 aircraft fighter jets, which are also, even though it's not the latest generation and the most modern, but they're quite effective in especially if they carry Kinjal missiles or other hypersonic missiles. They could be deadly, and they are already there. Now, what we do not know, and that's the biggest question of all, is whether the Russians have delivered hypersonic missiles, such as Kinjal or some other ones that could be used in even in the dated several submarines that the Venezuelans have. Now, I checked the official U.S. position of American military establishment is that none were delivered and none were discovered. That, however, doesn't mean that none were delivered. It simply means that Americans either declare that they were not delivered or didn't know that they were delivered if they were delivered. I'm not saying that they were delivered. I'm saying that it is not known for sure. Now, there's a lot of speculation that they were delivered, and I have looked at many, many Russian sites on the internet in Russian for Russian audience, where the authors do claim that Kalibr and Kinjal hypersonic missiles were delivered to Venezuela. Now, that doesn't mean that they were. I mean, it could be just speculation. The official spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia declared that this is just personal opinions of these bloggers and that none were officially delivered. So both the Americans and the Russians say none were delivered. However, that again doesn't mean that they were not. And most interesting topic in this regard is the flight of Il-65 cargo plane to Caracas at the end of October. Now, the Il-65 is a huge cargo plane that can carry 50 tons of cargo. And it did fly to Caracas, and usually it flies between Russia and Wagner Group forces in various African countries. And this time it did fly to Africa, but then from Africa it went on to Caracas. And this is the key point. Nobody knows what exactly was delivered at the end of October when the military cooperation treaty was ratified by the Russian Parliament Duma. Now, one cannot exclude a possibility that it did deliver some lethal missiles to Venezuela. Now, in that case, one would just say, if, for example, they were there, that would mean that the American aircraft carrier and supporting ships would be sitting ducks that could be shot in a matter of minutes. Because even though some defense against Caliber and the Kinjal missile does exist, but in a well-coordinated attack, they could be deadly, and they could make a big difference if United States attacked Venezuela. However, my personal view is that it is unlikely that Putin would agree to such escalation because he has not yet broken his relations with President Trump, and the Russians, and that means Putin in this case, do want American participation in the ending of the Ukraine war, and they do want to sign the treaty. And it is unlikely that the Russians would anger the Americans to such an extent by blowing up their aircraft carrier, although with the hands of Venezuela. But it cannot be excluded because, on the one hand, the Russians don't want to go that far because of the reasons I just identified. On the other hand, they can also not allow Maduro's regime to collapse. No, that would not be good for the prestige of Russia, for their relationship with Cuba and Nicaragua, for their overall geopolitical strategic position in the world. Russia cannot afford to let Maduro fall. That's a fact too. And that means that the Russians would do just about everything they can, avoiding a nuclear escalation, to support the survival of the Maduro regime, and that means of today's Venezuela. Now, one can imagine all kinds of scenarios, but one cannot exclude the scenario that if Americans do go all the way in targeting Caracas and trying to kill and decapitate the Venezuelan leadership, that can happen. One cannot exclude the possibility that in that case, the Russians would grant Maduro permission to defend himself with any means he has. And that also would mean hypersonic missiles against American targets in the Caribbean. And finally, a few words about Iran. As I mentioned earlier, China, at least publicly, is not militarily involved, although I wouldn't exclude that they do have some military assistance to Venezuela, and it could be quite important. But since we don't know, let it be assumed that they don't. However, they do provide serious financial assistance, and they are buying Venezuelan oil, and that assistance could be quite important in terms of commodities that the population needs in order to survive. And in that case, China's role could be extremely important in case there is a blockade or in case there's shortages of this or that the Chinese can easily replenish. And finally, about Iran. Now, Iran has a totally separate bilateral military agreement and cooperation with Venezuela, as two countries under the pressure from the United States and under sanctions from the United States. The two have very, very serious cooperation. And one part of it, which is known, which is a fact, is the delivery of Iranian drones. Now, that's very, very important. It could be as important as Russian missiles because the drones, Iranian drones, have shown their serious effect on the military side in Ukraine. And therefore, they could be deadly and they could be effective. And they're used daily in the Russian attacks in Ukraine. So, therefore, it seems to me one cannot exclude a possibility that a well prepared and coordinated attack, by a massive attack by many drones on American aircraft, can be unsuccessful. In other words, it can be successful, it can be done, and it can deliver serious damage to the American fleet in the Caribbean. So that's where we are at this point. It's a very dramatic situation. Military action can start any moment, and that is why it's interesting and important to weigh the possibilities and scenarios of what could be done and whether President Putin can save President Maduro. I stop at that, my dear friends. I want to thank you for your comments, which I love and which I respond to, try to respond to them all. I also invite you to subscribe to my channel, to put the likes if you do, and also to read my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity. It's in the description, and the link is there as well for your use. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.